Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream, and I'm pretty close to being on time. We shoot for 2:08 p.m. every single week, and I do the best I can, and sometimes I nail it, once in a while. Most of the time I'm a couple minutes running behind, and I apologize. Hi MR, hey Paul, hey Thomas. Hi Solar Powered Reef, I like the name of that one. Are you in Florida by any chance? I think I might know who you are. I wanted to start off this week with a couple of things, so I'm going to show you guys something that just caught my eye. I asked the guy's permission to share these pictures. He says yes. Now, I don't remember his name, but it was so hilarious that I was like, wow, I have never gone this route. So here, let me just set this up for you so you know what's going on. He got an aquarium, and he got it for a bargain, okay? So he was super excited, and apparently it was a 3-hour drive to his home. So he needed to get this tank back to the house, and he used his girlfriend's car. Now, I think that's a good enough setup. So let me just show you the picture that I saw. And I was like, what? So, no, that's not it. This is it right here. So if we will look here at this picture, I want to show you what's on the floor here. That is the car door. And here is the aquarium. And here is the side of the car, and here's his happy girlfriend, who can't believe he's doing this to her car. And he went even one step beyond this. You know that rubber trim that goes all the way around the door frame for the door to seal against? He took that off too. He said, I am sure I can get this into the back seat. And he couldn't. After he tried everything in his power to disassemble this car down to, the metal frame, the tank was still 1 inch too large. So he went ahead instead and he strapped it to the top of the car. So let me bring this to the front. So here it is on the road, on a freeway for 3 hours. And 90% of the comments were people saying, weren't you worried about a rock hitting it while you were driving home, and just shattering the glass, as it ricochets off the tire of a truck in front of you. And he was lucky, didn't get damaged. He got it there safely. It's impressive. A few people made comments about protecting with cardboard or something to, create a shield. But I was just like, wow, that is one determined individual. And apparently there was no discussion or serious decision-making process about, renting a truck to bring it home. It's like, it's coming home on this car, and that is it. So I had to show that to you guys because it just made me laugh. I mean, I get it. I totally get it. We've all done some crazy stuff with our would-be aquariums, or when we're trying to move, we think there's a way we can make this happen, and he made that happen. So kudos to him, and I hope that that car door seals properly from now on forward too, because that's an important one. The alignment of a door is pretty critical. What else? I wanted to remind you guys this week, I'm trying to get better about this because I've been neglecting it. I want to remind you that Reef Trace is a great app for keeping track of your water parameters. It is available for iOS and for Android. I'm going to be working on my first video about it since it's been updated like 50 times. So I'm going to give you guys a fresh look at it so you can take a look at it and see if it appeals to you. So that'll be coming out next week. I've got a couple of videos I got to get out next week. So that will be one of them, and something to look forward to there. So if you have it and you haven't updated it in a while, you should. If you don't have it, you should download it. And you can keep track of all your water parameters. You can keep track of all your aquarium maintenance. You can keep track of multiple tanks in the app. So and each one, you choose, I am now Caitlin's Reef, and then you do all your stuff. And then you switch to, I am the 400-gallon Reef, and then you do all your stuff. And if you do that, it'll be great. And if you try to put it all under one umbrella, you might get a little confused what's what. It's so much better to have them separated. And if you run a maintenance service, you could actually keep your clients' tanks under their own categories, and then when you're at the site, you can put in all your notes and the water parameters for the week, and get yourself really organized. So I highly recommend, getting that app. I think that would be useful to you. All right, let's see. Okay, today we're going to talk about PAR, and I want to talk to you about the one that comes from Apogee. So I have bought several PAR meters over the years. And this one was given to me, which was really cool. It happened last year at MACNA. I gave my presentation. At the end of the presentation, these two gentlemen were waiting to speak to me, And I just thought they were going to say, we enjoyed your talk. And they said, we are from Apogee. And I was like, I know who you people are. And I was excited. And they said, and we want to give you this par meter. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad I went to MACNA. So they gave me this meter, and this is what the meter looks like. I've got a long wire on it. This is the meter itself. And when you turn it on, you'll have your display right there showing you the amount of light that is hitting the sensor. And then the sensor itself is this guy right here. And I wanted to show this to you like this because, you know, when you get it, it's coiled up inside that little pouch. Then you can mount it to this little handle that they gave me. So it went together. I actually sell an acrylic bracket to connect a par meter to if you don't have a handle. But Apogee now offers a handle with a nice handle. And this is the shorter version. You can add one more rod, which I did not today, to make it a little bit smaller for the presentation. And the end tilts. And I want to explain to you why that matters. And then I want to explain to you, this has to be removed. So this is your par sensor cover. Just take it off. And if you don't take it off, you're not going to get accurate readings. So you want to do that. Now this right here is what is going to measure the light. And it's so important that when you're using it, that you point it at your light source straight at it. So if you were the sun, I would point this right at you. And if you were up there, I would then tilt it up there toward the sunlight, okay? So with your aquarium, you may have Kessel lights, you may have radions, you may have sky, you may have metal halides, you could have T5s. T5s are the only ones where it doesn't matter where you put the sensor. You've got your sensor, you put it in the tank, and you would just set it down in the water like this. And you would notice with T5s that it's just the same number all the time. It is what those fluorescent bulbs do. It's really kind of crazy. You don't expect it. I remember when I saw it, I was like, this is weird. The number's not changing on the front of the meter whatsoever, which any other light source typically, because the water's moving and rippling, you'll see the ripples are happening across the surface of the sensor. The ripples are breaking up the light. And so the number is constantly moving up and down on the scale of your display, and you just watch it closely and you look for your average number, which is what I do. And then you will find out what your par is in that specific spot you measured. But no matter where you're measuring your tank, if you're measuring up high, or you're measuring down low, or you're measuring in the corner, or you're measuring on top of a coral, or you're measuring inside a anemone, wherever you put it, make the sensor point straight to the closest light source. If you have two lights, and you're just trying to see, well, what is the light par measurement in the center between the two lights, you can do that and just point straight up, and it will show you what it catches from the two light sources. But if you are saying, well, I'm going to point it to this light and I'm going to point it to this light, you can. I mean, you can do that. But if you're just trying to find like an average number of what is probably happening between two fixtures, that's how I would do it. I'll just point straight up because the light is going to come in at whatever angle it is. I went ahead and I wrote down some of my numbers. Nice organized writing paper. And so I have 3 lights over my tank, the 3 Neptune Sky. I've had them now for, well, over 2 years. Probably 26 months or so. And interestingly, they don't match. Now, I don't know why, but I'm just reading the numbers, how they're coming off the meter. So I put the sensor directly in the middle of my reef, where the bottom, hang on, I didn't even put this on the screen. Well, okay, so you can see the water over my head. I set the bottom of this plastic on the surface of the water and measured directly under the light fixture, and then I went to the next light fixture and went to the third one. I wanted to know what the measurement of par was in the air above the water at that point, right in the middle of the tank. So my tank is 36 inches front to back, so I was roughly in the 18-inch area front to back, got in the middle, set the base of that on top of the water so it's the same height for all 3 light fixtures. My first light fixture measured at 1,050 par. The middle one measured at 975, and the one over the hammer coral, which would be, which one am I pointing? I'm always pointing the wrong way. Yeah, this one over here, over the hammer coral was 900. So 1,050 versus 900 at the other end. Don't know why. Each light has their own power supply, and for whatever reason, it went from highest to medium to lowest, like a Three Little Bears story. I don't understand that. But it doesn't really matter. It's just interesting to note. And you know, the next thing I do is see how much power each light is pulling to see if they are pulling the same wattage. Maybe one isn't running as well as it should be for whatever reason. Maybe the cooling fans need to be cleaned. Maybe it's just tired. Maybe I need to start looking at that ballast. I don't know, but that's just at the surface before it went down in the water. There was something else I wanted to say about that before I move on. The light, the distance. Oh man, I lost it. I had it and it was in my brain. I was like, okay, I'm talking. I'll say that in a second. And I lost it. It'll come back to me. All right, so the next phase was to put the sensor directly under the surface of the water. So now I've got water just boiling over the top of it, just moving like, because my water, look at my water right now in the video. It is constantly moving nonstop over my head. So that is what it was doing over the top of the sensor. And so and what I did was I held the meter in place, sensor pointing straight up at the center of the light fixture, and I watched it for about 20 seconds. And then, you know, the number went up and went down, up and down, and I found that medium average, and it measured at 650 over the shadow caster. In that general area over there, right there. Then the middle of the reef, it was measuring at 600, and over the hammer coral area, it was measuring at 540. Then I went down to specific corals in the tank. For example, I wanted to know what is the par at the shadow caster, which is the branching thing. I keep pointing the wrong side. Right there. I want to know what is the par at that coral, on that stick, right in that spot. Not that spot up there. I didn't even bother measuring there. I want to know what's happening right here because the polyps are glowing blue. It's really pretty. And that spot measured 400 par. Then in the middle of the reef behind my head here, I'll scoot over a little bit so you can see all those SPS right there. It was measuring around 410, and when I put the sensor down inside the blue tort, it was measuring 310. Over the hammer itself, floating in the water because the hammer isn't tall enough, that measured about 400, but then when I got down into the hammer, it was between 230 and 220. The acro right, oh, good, I got it right. That acro right there is called the ectoplasm, and it's getting 330 par. And over here in this area that's not doing quite so well lately, it's down at 220. And then this one way down here that I've been losing is measuring at 170, but it's stopped dying. So it's like half alive, half dead. So I will save what I can, I'll salvage it, and I will re-glue it, and it'll be smaller because I lost 50% of it. The Montipora digitata that is behind my head right there, that little guy right there was measuring at 220. The elegance coral, which is not in this video. We need to get a fresh video when I'm done working on the tank. Right down here where the clownfish are hanging out. Right there, that spot. That's where my elegance coral is, and it's a beautiful elegance. It's green with purple tips, and it is measuring 170. The rose bubble tip that you can see just behind the yellow tang there in this video was measuring at 190. The sea bay is measuring around 230. Down at the sand, which is 24 inches from the water to the top of the sand, is measuring about 140, 110, 160, 110. So that area down low is, you know, the low hundreds. And I have a pectinia over there on the far left of my tank, and it is measuring, the light it's getting is about 140. So if that's kind of helping you with identifying what strengths of par you need for certain corals, I feel like that would be such a boost for the hobby, because when you buy a coral, a lot of times the description is, this needs high flow, high light. This needs medium flow, medium light. This one needs low flow, low light. And you're like, well, what's low light? And also, oh, I remembered it. I knew I'd remember. I also wanted to measure my lights when they were running at 80%, which is my peak of the day lighting. That means all my channels are at 100%, but the total fixture is running at 80%. That runs from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock in the evening every single day for those 3 hours. The rest of the time, it's less light or less par. And So I set up my lights today to do this measurement. I went ahead and I activated a switch to, or it's called a profile in the Apex Fusion. And I said, turn this on into this mode exactly right now. So it's actually still locked into it. My tank's in high noon right now. Let me go turn that off while I'm talking to you guys. And that's the thing. If you're measuring par and it's not during your peak, and you're measuring at a different time of day, then it's going to be inaccurate. And you're going to be thinking, well, what's the deal? Okay, I just switched it back to normal. So now my tank is going to be a little bit darker. It's going to be around 56% instead of 80%. Because there's no reason to run 80% all day long for my tank. It doesn't need it. You can see all the stuff grows and it's very happy. And it's very natural looking, which I really do appreciate. And yes, John was just saying that. I presume you do your test when your light's at the highest point. That is exactly what I'm doing. And that's what I was starting to say. If you were to measure at like noon, and then your lights aren't really at their highest point, or you're measuring it at 10 a.m. or you're measuring it at 9 p.m. or whatever when things are tapering off, you're going to get different numbers. Now, if you want to measure par at all different times of day, you definitely can. And to know what these numbers are helps you. And let me show you why. I grabbed this image also from Polo Reef. It's a group on Facebook. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, maybe it's on my desktop. Here it is. All right. So here we'll go. We'll grab this thing right here. So this was a post that a guy made, and it's exactly what I felt we should have been doing 10 years ago. He said, I'm trying to grow many species of Acropora. Tenuis is difficult for me, mainly because of the Indonesian import. They tend to not grow for months and then slowly die. I have them mostly around 200 to 250 par in medium flow. So to increase my chances, what conditions do you keep your Acropora tenuis like? Most in terms of par, flow, blue and white light. I can go up to 700 par and very high flow in my new frag tank. Help is very much appreciated. So if we had a database that listed this coral and everyone's input gave us a mean average of, it needs to be 350 to 450, then you would know in your tank, if you don't have enough par, you're not going to buy this coral. And that is, I think, something that the future of the hobby could really benefit from. And there is some generic stuff out there. But I've always wished there was a master database where you would input your information for your coral. You have a hammer coral, and the par is this. And then your buddy Steve, he has a hammer coral, and he puts in his par. And everyone does it. And then, the algorithm or the mathematics of it all figures out and throws away the lowest one and the highest one and gets you that average of what is going to be ideal for the most amount of people when it comes to hammer. And then you can do the same thing with specific Acropora species, specific anemones. It could be a whole bunch of different things. But because we don't have that information, we're guessing. And we've been guessing for 20 years. And 10 years ago, I made the suggestion that we have this master database, and here I am 10 years later saying, we still don't have it. I wish we did. So the first step, of course, is going to be to get you guys to get one of these things. Here we go. It's a nice par meter, and I highly recommend you get one. Now, there's different things on the market. Apogee's been around for a long time. And I've used different ones. The one I'm using right now, the model is a MQ510. It is designed specifically for LED lighting, which is fantastic. Because previous versions were made for sunlight. They were made for metal halides. And they weren't really well suited for LEDs. And they definitely were not well suited for blue light. Then they came out with another model, I'd say, 4 or 5 years ago. And a lot of people were kind of doubting the numbers. They just said, there's something not right about this. And it turned out, after talking with the company, this is hearsay. I didn't hear it. I did not have this conversation with the company. Someone else did and told me that the company said, okay, whatever the numbers you have to multiply it times 1.6. And I thought, well, that's weird. We shouldn't have to do this math. It should do it in it. It's a little tiny calculator. Let it crunch the numbers and spit out the real number for us so that way we have it. Well, the MQ510 does it in device. So whatever the number is you see on your screen is actually the true number. And it's designed for LEDs. It can handle the blue lighting. So it's a really good, reliable meter, and I can recommend it. Now, it's expensive. I think it's around $440. But once you own it, you kind of own it for life. You're going to have it for a long time. You could lend it to others. You could rent it to others. I believe companies like BRS will let you rent a par meter where you can have it for a duration, then you return it, so it doesn't cost you, maybe it's $50 or $75 or $100 to use it briefly, because it's not something you're going to use all the time. But like I said, I've always owned one. I have 2 or 3 in my possession. The original one is somewhere in my pile of Reef stuff I never get rid of, and then I've got the newer model, and now I got the brand new one, and I'm really happy about that. And I am sure that one of these meters will be available in September during Markna. So, if you haven't heard about Markna yet, it's because my big announcement has not been quite made. We are still working on a couple more little tiny logistical things, but as soon as we can point you to it, the information will be out there. I believe it's 78 days till Markna. So, having one of those in the raffle will be great, and anyone can use it around the world because it's not specific to a certain electricity. And so that would be a really cool prize for people attending that are trying to enter the raffle. Markna will have a raffle in it. There will be a prize between each presentation, and it's an international event, so that means prizes can be shipped everywhere. And again, I was going somewhere with that. And I've lost it again. Wow, what is going on? I feel warm. The temperature this week has been pretty rough, and it's going to get worse. I'll digress for a second. I just saw the preview for the weather this week. Like next Wednesday, it's supposed to be 112 here. And that is hot in Texas. That is very unpleasant. So if you are in an area where you're dealing with a lot of heat and you need to worry about your tank, you need to worry about it being okay, you should start preparing today, not on the day it happens. So if you haven't already frozen some bottles of water and kept them in the freezer that you can float in your tank, if you haven't got a big cooling fan ready to go, if you don't have a portable air conditioner you can pull out in a pinch, might be worth looking into before the crisis begins with your aquarium. So keep that in mind. Keep a close eye on your tanks during the heat waves as they happen all throughout the summer, and hopefully everything will be okay and you'll be able to keep your livestock safe. And I thought of what I was trying to think of. See? That's the beauty of it. So the raffle, the prizes that will be given away, you have to buy a ticket, but the proceeds are going to Coral Restoration Foundation. So I'm very excited that we are going to be doing that. I just feel like this is going to be a really cool event. Again, more details to come soon with the official announcement. For now, I'm just giving you guys little teasers on the show while you're tuning in for the weekly live stream, because you guys are my family, and I usually broadcast through here, and then of course through social media on Instagram and Facebook later. All right. If you can measure your par twice a year for your aquarium, that would be ideal. And the reason we want to do it a couple of times a year is because we want to see if the lights are degrading, or if your diodes are failing, or even if it's just getting covered in salt creep and it's time to clean it off because it's been spattered and you've been ignoring it, or not even looking up at it. You might be standing there looking at your tank and you look at the surface, but you never look up into the lights because they're kind of blinding. And when they're off, they're off. Again, you're not looking into the lights. So it may be time to clean up your fixture and make sure that it's nice and clean so you're getting the maximum amount of par out of your fixture, because it's still running. It's on, but are you getting what you're supposed to be getting? Or are you being limited to the fact that there's a bunch of crud on it? Or if your tank has covers like solid glass or solid acrylic, that stuff, you need to clean those. If you had a perfectly clean piece of glass between your light and your tank, the drop off is minimal. A long time ago, I heard in a presentation that you could lose 10% or more of your light, which is a lot. I mean, think about it. You buy a light fixture and you're told, well, you can only use 90% of it, you'd be unhappy. But when I did my own par measurements way back, I grabbed some Starfire and I put it between the metal halide and the tank, and then I took a piece of acrylic and I put it between the metal halide and the tank. And it was such a minor change, I was really impressed. But that's with pristine glass or pristine acrylic. Now, once it starts getting clouded up, foggy, covered in spatter, covered in algae, then your light is going to drop off dramatically. And that is, absolutely the case with Caitlin's Reef. I have that solid piece of polycarbonate on the top of the aquarium to keep the bubbles inside because I run an air stone. And the top of that thing actually turns kind of brown algae. So once a week, I completely take the lid off, I take it to the sink and I clean both sides, I wipe it down, I put it back on top so it's like new. When I ignore it and let it go even longer than a week, the color of the tank changes because the light is shining through a brown patch. So you got to make sure that your stuff is really, really clean up at the top of your tank. If you have a screen, you might need to clean the screen. It's possible that the screen is getting a little bit more stuff on it, and that is obscuring some of the light, and we want to make sure that that can penetrate as well. And then finally, dead corals. If you have stuff in your tank that's dead and shading things underneath it, there's no benefit for the light, right? So you do need to go through your tank and clean it out and prune it, and even prune colonies to kind of remove the branches that are covering the things below, so that way they can continue to grow and thrive and be pretty. So these are some of the things we want to keep in mind. Let's say you bought a brand new light fixture in 2019, before COVID, and now it is 2023. So we're already 4 years in. And if you had measured the par when you first got it and kept notes, and then you measured again this year, 4 years later, you could see the difference in intensity of what you're getting out of your light fixture. Then, at that point, you could say, it might be time for me to start to replace my light fixture. Because we don't just replace lights because a new model comes out necessarily, but we do replace them when they start to fail. And you could have a fixture that has multiple diodes that have burned out, or it could be that just the overall intensity has dropped and you're running it at the highest you possibly can. The fans are blowing, trying to keep it from overheating, and your tank is limping along. It's just not doing well. And listen, I had a friend who had a SPS Reef that just wasn't doing so great. And I said to him, you need to replace your lights. They're ancient. And he said, you really think so? They look fine. I said, I guarantee you those ancient Gen 2 Radeons are done. And so I got him a bunch of, I don't know, maybe Gen 5s or Gen 6s about a year and a half ago. And the whole tank just grew. And he was like, I can't believe it. And I was like, I can, but I understand your shock. Because when we look at a light bulb and it's on, we're thinking it works. But it could be dimmer than we think. And believe it or not, we just don't see it with our eye like you can when you measure it with a device. I always find it interesting, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else, but I find it interesting when someone doesn't notice, like for example, their vision is getting worse. And it's just getting dimmer. And then they go and do laser eye surgery and like, oh my God, everything's so much brighter. It's because they really cleaned up the garbage that was in your eyes, right? But it was so gradual in every day of your life that you didn't realize you were missing out on something that had gotten a little bit worse. It's the same thing with the lights over our system. We get LED fixture-based lights that have a run time of basically 5 years. And for you to run it 6, 7, 8 years just because it still works doesn't mean it's going to be as efficient. Just like having a protein skimmer that you've had for 14 years like I did, but you're running the original pumps. I guarantee you it's not going to skim as well as getting brand new pumps on the body of that skimmer. Now, back when Dwayne was rebuilding his lights, my friend Dwayne in Seattle, he was buying the Chinese black boxes, and he ran them at 100% every single day, and every single year he desoldered them completely, and he soldered in brand new LEDs. And it was something like, I forget what he told me, 8 fixtures, 10, 12 fixtures, because he has the Reef tank and then multiple little tanks growing frags. And he had to go through and basically replace each one of them, rebuild them from scratch so he could burn them at 100% for another year. And that was his routine forever. And then one day he finally got to try some Radeons, like, oh, these are nice. And he said, I don't have to do the soldering thing anymore. I was like, no, you don't. That's crazy. I can't believe you've been doing this all this time. And then he got the upgrade to the Sky light fixture, and he loves that, and he runs his hard. He runs them at 100%, but I think he's tapered off on it a little bit, like compared to the original stuff he used to use. But yeah, and he's got phenomenal results. So having good quality equipment is key. For me, being able to measure the par and realize that one of my fixtures is running at a lesser amount than another one on the exact same tank that were built on the same day, sold on the same day, installed on the same day. They should be side by side, very close to each other, and there was a difference of 150, and that was measuring in the air. So I'm gonna go see what I can figure out. Is the ballast not putting out as much wattage? Like I said, could it be that it's getting dirty and clogged up? Is it just needs to be wiped down? And you know what? That could be it. because every single night I turn off my return pump to keep the water in the tank for the food to go in and not go down the drain. And then when I turn the return pump turns itself back on 10 minutes later, there's a lot of sputtering and splattering, and it might be just filthy. And I bet if I were to just wipe it down like I was just talking about, because now I'm thinking about it, I bet if I remeasure the par, that number might be up another 100. And it might be normal. So that could be on me. And it has nothing to do with the manufacturer of the product. But nothing is forever is the one thing I want you to take away from this. You may need to get new lights at some point. You should not think they're forever, because they're not. They are a 5-year investment. Just like when I bought this computer I do the live streams on, when I was ordering it from Apple, I was like, I want the best of everything because I'm going to use this for the next 4 or 5 years. I never thought this is what I'm going to use for the next decade because I know how technology is and how it constantly changes. So that is what I'm going to recommend to you. I'd be happy to answer more questions to you about PAR as best I can. I'm not the leading expert on this topic. This is not my super strength, but I have a lot of experience with measuring in water. And I will, before I jump in your questions, I do want to say there's a few things that I do differently than others when it comes to measuring the light in your tank. So this is something that Sanjay Yoshi was doing for a long time. He was doing presentations on this, and he would show us how he would measure every inch of the aquarium. It was very interesting. And he would measure up high, and he would then work from the epicenter outward, and then out, and out, and out. I mean, he tracked it. He had a bunch of minions, which I believe are called students, and they would help him, or maybe they were interns, I don't know what. And they would, help document all this, and he would measure all the PAR measurements at the height point. So let's say it's a 24-inch by 24-inch grid, and he measured every single inch of that grid all the way, right? Then he went down an inch, did the exact same thing, and down an inch, and did the whole thing. So then he could create like this colorful bell curve looking thing to show you the high intensity PAR, the lesser PAR, and then finally the little stuff down to the surface. It was really interesting to see, and it was a really good representation of how light is going into the tank and what you can expect. And he would do that with different reflectors, different bulbs, and but he always did it in the air. He never did it with water. And he absolutely never did it with running water. And that has always been my argument, is that I want to know what the PAR is in my tank under normal conditions, not when the power heads are off, not when the return pump is off and it's all sitting stagnant, because that's not the light my corals get all day long. They get the chaos that is dumping into my tank 24 hours, during the lighting period, so 8 hours a day. I would want to know what's happening at the surface. I want to know what's happening down lower. And it's harder in a tank full of corals than it is in a new tank. So if you were measuring your tank with, a rock aquascape that has a few little frag plugs, it's way easier to measure PAR than trying to go into my reef right now. Right in the middle of my reef, let me scoot over a little bit. See all those corals right there? It's dense, and it's completely the whole thing. And I tried to sneak the sensor down into the center between some corals to get down to the 12-inch mark so I could measure 12 inches from the surface. I think the PAR was like 72. I was like, well, that's not true. It's because there's all these corals above, and I jammed it under the corals, and it's completely in the shade. It's getting no light. And I'm not trying to grow anything down in the 12-inch mark down there. I can only tell you what's happening at the big mat. And I can measure that whole area, that whole surface, and I can tell you those 15 corals, what each one is getting at the exact same height, because they're all at the same height in that spot. I did measure the green slimer, which is way up there at the surface, and I stuck the meter up. Is that right? Nope. Never gonna get that right. I tried to measure up there where those branches are, right there. Right there. And I wanted to see what that spot was, and that was measuring at 520. And just to the right of it, it was measuring about 600 PAR. And the coral has completely grown almost to touch the surface. And when the return pump is off, this much of the coral is sticking out of the water right now during those 10 minutes a day when I feed the reef. But I always like to measure the PAR with everything on rather than having everything off. Now the downside of measuring with everything on is, like I said, the numbers on the meter are constantly changing. So it might say 580, 611, 592, 640, 572, 601, 540, and then 680. And it just jumps around because of the way the water's rippling and the way the light is condensed in the ripples and the shimmer lines that are hitting your corals. This is even more dominant in pinpoint lighting, such as maybe a Kessel 360. Definitely a metal halide bulb, because it's a plasma bulb right there that's hitting from a focal point, versus, you know, my Sky is, I don't know how many, 120 LED points. So I just put mine, I aim for the center of the big panel of LEDs and try to get that measurement. I wasn't trying to figure out if I was under a blue diode or a white diode. I didn't try to find the white diode to get the best number. I just put my meter where it was, center to the light, aim to the center, and at the right height in the water to get my measurement. I watched the numbers bounce around until I found my sweet spot. And I said, okay, that seems to be 620, that seems to be 310, that seems to be 160, that seems to be about 110. And that's how I've always measured. So I kind of feel like that's more realistic measuring for me at least. I don't know if you agree with me, if you think, no, it has to be with everything turned off. That, you know, if that's your belief, then go with it. And maybe your measurements are better than mine. But I can tell you this. Another thing, keep in mind, if you turn off all the flow and your return pump is off and some of the water in the tank drained down into the sump, now your water line in the tank has dropped about an inch. So now the light fixture is an inch further away from the surface, and there's an inch less water between your coral and the water line, right? So you might get this measurement, but once you add another inch of water on top, it's going to change your number. It absolutely will. So that's one of the reasons why I want everything running when I do my measurements. And and like I said, I have a huge article about PAR on my website where I went into this and I broke it down, and I probably have, I don't know, 30 different pictures with 20 different sets of PAR numbers based on different bulbs, different intensities, different distances, with the return pump off versus the return pump on, with the piece of glass, with the piece of acrylic, with nothing at all. You know, I wanted to know all the things, and so that's how I did all my measurements. So that is kind of where I was, and that's where I'm going to kind of stop about this. So let's start jumping into your questions and see if I can answer anything else here that I might have forgotten to mention. Paul says that there's an app you can get for your phone that can measure PAR. And he says, put your iPhone in the waterproof case, and Bob is your uncle. Well, that's good. I bet the app is called Bob's Your Uncle. I think there's another PAR meter on the market. I saw it at Macna, and the name is eluding me right now. Senai? Maybe it's Senai. And they've got something that you can hook up to something to get some measurements. And that's another method. But again, and I mean, I'm not dissing it. Just, you want to, whatever device you're using, let's know what the facts are. So if like 50 people use the apogee meter to measure and 50 people use a Senai to measure, it'd be nice if we knew that they corresponded. It'd be even great if some of those people could trade and remeasure and see if they are the equivalent of each other. I'm sure these companies are comparing each other's products to, you know, one another to say theirs is better than the other guy or that kind of thing. But you know, I don't know fact from fiction and that kind of stuff. I mean, that all comes down to selling. And I'm just an end user like you are, and I'm just trying to explain what the benefit is of having this. It can tell me if a light fixture is dirty, if it is failing, if it's too old, or if it's doing a great job, or if you just said, look, Mark, I know you're doing great with your dendrophilia. I just bought one. What PAR do you have you're sitting in? I can tell you. And that way you can mimic that if you have a meter as well to measure that. Dave asks me, have you set up the MXM, is that right? Mobius expansion module? Yes, I have got it plugged in and I'm still working with it. I don't have an opinion yet. Reef Keeper says, nice, a live stream. I wasn't sure if you could be at RAP New York. Nope, a lot of people are. It seems like everybody goes there. I've never been to the one in New York. That is one I've missed. Let's see. Oh, wow. Kyle has already left Reefapalooza. He's on his return trip home from, like, you were there fast. Just a couple hours and you're done? Let's see. Oh, thanks, Mike. Mike's saying that he has been a supporter of this channel for the last 2 years. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that. And that is something you can use the join button on this channel and become a follower. It just chips in a few bucks toward get me a cup of coffee, and you know, it's appreciated. Oh, thank you, Andrea. She says 77 days until Markna. I hadn't stuck that in my Google calculator lately. I've been kind of just, when I was setting up the business license and when I was setting up the bank account, I knew exactly how many days were left. I would tell them, we have 80 days to get this done. So it's counting down. JT Dribbles says, how do I get my clowns to get along like that? Well, if it's a group of the exact same clownfish from the same clutch of eggs, it helps. But even then, there could be some squabbling, and you may have to rescue one or two that are being bullied. But ideally, you want them to all be different sizes, so that way there's no fighting of two identical sized fish. Bob wants to know if there is a website for Markna. It's not live yet, but the URL is markna.com. So that'll be easy to go. Right now it's pointed to Milo's Reef. Oh, nice. Huang says that his cousin gave him a 15-gallon tank with a baby dory, a blood shrimp, and a few corals. The canister filter was broken, so he's using my method of Caitlin's Reef until I get a new filter. That's all you got to do. Just change some water. That's not a difficult tank at all. It's actually doing quite well, and I shared a couple of videos this week of that crazy, gorgeous gorgonian. And I shared a video last week where I showed me siphoning off the algae right off the stems of the gorgonian, and it just came right off. I mean, it wasn't like glued on like I expected. And the coral, of course, immediately opened up and looked fantastic. And if you look late at night, if you have that gorgonian, check on it during, blackout. Check out then. Use a flashlight. You'll be blown away. It is an experts-only considered coral. I've already had a few people voice their misgivings that I got it at all. And I was thinking Caitlin's tank, because it doesn't have a skimmer and it doesn't have all the filtration that I normally run a reef tank with, that the water would be dirty enough that this coral could be okay. But I have no guarantees on that. Now, I did move my Nero 5 pump down a few inches so it would more blow on that coral to hopefully blow off any algae it wants to grab on. And the darn pump did such a good job that the coral came off where I had it mounted, and the sand in that corner moved, which made the rock tilt. So now the darn thing's against the glass. So I have to get in there today and kind of straighten it out and maybe move that pump a little bit differently to get some good flow across it without actually blowing at it. And we'll see what happens. But I would love to, I'd love to say this coral has been doing great for me for 12 months. That would be a wonderful report to give. I don't know what's going to happen, but I did try this one a long time ago just because it was something at the fish store. I was like, oh, I'll take that. That's colorful. And, it didn't last long at all. But so far I've had it a month, and it looks really pretty. And, using Reef is a really easy way to feed because I can mix up the powder into a small cup of water, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then I turn off that little Shark Pro filter so it's not trapping any organics, and I pour it in the tank, and the whole tank gets a little bit cloudy, and it gives this coral an opportunity to feed. And I do that when I see the polyps out. I don't just put the food in the tank hoping that the coral will suddenly wake up and say, oh, there's food, let me open. I am doing it as soon as I see the polyps. So if I see it at 10 a.m. and I look at the tank, because that light doesn't turn on until 3 p.m., and if I see the polyps out, I just go ahead and mix them up, set a timer on my watch to remind me so I don't just forget about the cup sitting there on the walkboard for an hour later and like, oh, I never did it. I try to stay on top of it, get the food in the water, and let those polyps eat. And I could potentially set up something with a doser, which would mean I have to get a doser. But I could possibly trickle in like phytoplankton or something late at night, during the pitch dark hours when that coral should be wide open, because it tends to be open when it's pitch dark. And it's so pretty with those white polyps. It's crazy. Reed says, what are your thoughts about having teeth versus no teeth on the sump refugium baffle? Well, I think teeth are great because they keep the macroalgae in its zone, especially if the return pump is off and the water has risen in your sump and refugium and the stuff floating to the surface. It could migrate right over the baffle into the next zone. If you don't have any kind of like teeth cut out into the acrylic, if it's a glass baffle, you could glue something along the top edge like egg crate, and you could just cut yourself out a perfect section of egg crate, put some silicone on the bottom, and then you just press it down onto the glass, let it dry, and then after it's cured, now you have teeth. It's a real simple thing. If you have nothing there at all, you could probably put something up, some kind of mesh material. You could stand egg crate up to kind of create a divider. But in the end, it comes down to what is something you're going to keep an eye on and keep clean versus something that you may neglect. But yeah, I think keeping those macroalgae in their zone is ideal, and anything you have to do to keep them there is a smart move. Baker's Reef got a new T-shirt from my website. He says, I'm a lineman and a reefer, so wearing the I play with water and electricity is very fitting. That's great. You wear it to work then and all your buddies make fun of you? Reed says, I was thinking about the logistics of putting together a website database to try and collect data for PAR and other parameters, per coral. Could be helpful, but could be difficult to manage and police. Yeah. I remember that I talked about doing this in Reef Trace as well, because we have all these people with the app, and if they're entering in their information, that would be a great way for us to combine it. Because we already do that in the app with water parameters. If you were to look at the statistics page, it shows what the ocean water is, it shows the numbers I recommend, then it shows the averages of the Reef Trace users. And that's pretty interesting. And what was really funny to my eye was that the average Reef Trace user has no nitrate or phosphate because so many of you start your tanks with dry rock and dry sand. And because of that, you guys are battling this no nitrate, no phosphate scenario where back in the day, all we did was do what we could to get the nitrate and phosphate down from our tanks using live rock and live sand. So the numbers look kind of like, yeah, no one's got a problem, when really you're having to dose nitrate and phosphate just to avoid getting things like dinoflagellates. All right, any other questions? I can't believe it. We're less than an hour and I'm already done talking. It's okay. I can end the live stream early today. I do need to work on my aquarium stand. I thought I'd work on it this week and did not have the time whatsoever. I thought yesterday I'd do it, and then I had 5 orders come in. I was like, well, let me get those out the door, and so I worked on that instead. But I've had the wood here for a couple of weeks, and I did some measurements yesterday because I was going to start drawing it up in my software so the CNC could cut out the different panels. And then I'm going to go ahead and build that stand, and I think I'm going to paint it. I could stain it, but I don't want to. I think I'm going to paint it, and I think the color I'm going to go with is light gray because the room has gray walls, and then I have the red wall, and then I've got the dark brown floor. And since I'm planning to at some point remodel my kitchen and all that's going to be white, I don't want the aquarium stuff to look like an extension of the kitchen, so I need it to be a little different. So I think a lighter gray against the darker gray might be a smart move, and I think it'll look decent. I hope it will. I'm trying to avoid the conflicting colors that I'm so naturally drawn to. I was like, oh, let's go with deep cherry or something like that, but then it looks all strange against gray and red. So I was like, eh. So I'm still kind of debating. First, I got to build the stand and canopy, and then once that's done, then I got to come down to a decision and follow through on it because this thing's been dragging out way too long anyway, and I need to get those anemones and clowns back into their beautiful spot. I received new lights from Ecotech that are going to go on that tank. I already bought a new Vortec for it a while back. The return pump's already a Vectra, which is also Ecotech, so it's kind of an Ecotech tank anyway. But I got a Gen 6 Radeon for that tank and a couple of AI blades. So that will all go over the new tank that's going to be set up. That's the one you guys saw being built in the Planet Aquarium video last year. John says, on a scale of 10, so I'm assuming 1 to 10, where would you put lighting compared to flow and parameters, etc.? I would say that lighting is an 8 on the scale of 1 to 10. Lighting is really important. So yeah, I'd give it a solid 8. Consistency of parameters, I would give that a 9. And then random flow, I would also give it a good 9. So you want good flow that's randomized, that's chaotic. You want to have good lighting, and you want to have good, stable water parameters day after day, week after week, month after month. The longer you can keep all those things stable and strong, the better. I was just on Devin's live stream a few days ago, and we were talking about aquarium maintenance and what matters. And I was saying that I know a lot of hobbyists are really bad about cleaning the power heads in their display tank, whether it's gyres or wave pumps or vortex or whatever. They just don't clean them like they should. And so if you are a Vortec owner, for example, like I am, I have extras of the wet side, the part that's inside the tank, and I will just take the dirty one out, put the clean one in, and soak the wet, the dirty one in a solution of pump clean for a few hours or overnight or a couple days. And then I'll scrub it up and I put it away for next time. But in the meantime, by swapping it instantly, my tank loses flow for like a minute. Just long enough to turn it off, take it out, put the new one in, turn the pump back on. It's less than a minute. And that way I have good, strong flow through the tank, because as those things get cruddy and clogged up and covered in algae and slime, the flow coming out of them is way worse. I had to help someone with his aquarium a few months ago in Dallas, and I drove out there. And I looked at the tank, and the tank just looked stagnant. I mean, there was no movement other than fish. And I was just looking, I was like, what is going on in here? And he's like, no, everything's on. And I was like, I don't know. So, the whole point of me going there was to kind of restore it back to its life, get it going, address some issues that were really important. And while I was there, I started cleaning gyre pumps. And he had 6 gyres. And when I was done, I got all 6 of them. I soaked them in muriatic acid. I scrubbed them. My hands were burning. And I completely disassembled them down to the core. Then I built them all back together, which was a real pain because I'm not a gyre user. So I was trying to figure out, here's the A side, here's the B side, here's this part. You got to press this in. There's a grommet. Oh, let me pop off this cap, slide it over the end, get the grommet lined up, push it in. Oh man, it was such a beating. And I got all 6 of them running. Put them in the tank. And there was just stuff blowing everywhere. It just looked like I was creating a sandstorm. And he's like, wow. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. Hopefully your protein skimmer will capture a lot of this stuff. But there had not been good flow in the tank for a super long time because they needed to be cleaned. So when it comes to cleaning stuff in your tank, your power heads, the things that create the flow in the tank, so important. And of course your return pump needs to be cleaned from time to time, at least once a year as well. And so if you're staying on top of those things, you'll get that good flow to go along with your great water parameters, to go along with your great lighting. And so that's where I'm at on those kind of things. So I hope that was a long answer to your question, but it's important that we get all these things right. We can't just focus on the one, it's got to be all of them. ITC meter. That's what I was thinking of. Coqui 1 per. He said he recently got the ITC par meter and was able to set up a lamp to about 20% lower intensity than the recommended intensity, and was programmed to 80%, and I was getting 700 par at the top. Well, yeah, I mean, at the top, you're always going to get fantastic numbers. The trick is, are you getting 700 par at the top of your rock work? And if you are, and you have corals that love 700 par, that's great. Oh, by the way, when you're trying to add new corals to a tank, the intensity of the par in your tank is what it is. The smartest thing you can do with those brand new frags, and what I've always done, is I like to put them down low on the sand, and then after a few weeks, because I just leave it alone, then I'll move it up to the new location. And if it was an Acropora that I had down low for a long time, and then I wanted to put it somewhere that's 700 par, for example, that might be too much. So there's a couple of tricks. There was one trick this one guy did back in the day. It was really smart. And I've never heard of anyone doing that until he posted about it. But I think he had egg crate on the top of his aquarium, which is lighting diffuser. And then, he had all his lights on the top. It was a huge tank. And then when he got a brand new coral and he wanted to put it in one specific spot, like he had a bald spot, he put the coral right there, but he knew that he just baked that brand new coral. He went out and got a bunch of nylon screen, like you do to screen a window, and he cut out a bunch of circles. And so he'd plant the coral in that spot, put the egg crate back in place, and then set like 6 layers of screen on top of the egg crate. So it was getting minimal light. And then each day or every couple of days, he'd remove 1 circle of screen. So now it's 5 layers, and then 4 layers, and then 3, and then 2, and then finally 1. And then it was down to egg crate, and the light, that's how he light acclimated his new coral. Now, I don't do that, but I thought it was brilliant. So if that was something you wanted to do, you could. If you have a light fixture that has coral acclimation mode, you can enable that, and it'll lower your normal schedule to something much lower. Let's say maybe it's 40% of what it usually is, and then it will gradually increase it a little bit each day until after like 2 weeks, you're back to your normal schedule. The other choice is, like I was saying, put it down on the sand, and then after 2-3 weeks, move it up to like a midpoint, and then finally, after a couple more weeks, put it to the final destination, which would be the spot with a high light, and that coral should do quite well for you. Got Juice says, do you still offer online consulting services? Yes, I do. So if you want to just send me an email, you can send it at sales@milesreef.com, and we can take it from there. Be happy to do so for you. Will, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. That will be turned into a cup of coffee. Absolutely. That is totally going to happen. I think I'm going to end it here today. I think that's it. So I got lots to do. I want to get that aquarium stand going. It is 3 o'clock. I still have time to run Minion, get some pieces cut up. Maybe I can build it tonight or work on it tomorrow. And it would be really nice to get that done. And then as soon as I can, put the tank on the stand. Because once it's on the stand, then I can start dealing with the plumbing. And once I get the plumbing done, I can put some water in that tank and get it running, which would be really exciting after such a long time. I know a lot of you have been patiently waiting for me. And, you know, there's one of me, and I always try to think of what I need to deal with today, and that just has not been a huge priority. But I do appreciate, you know, that you guys ask or pester. That's okay. It's all right. I get it. Jason just said hi and bye because he could feel it. Let me go ahead and go to the outro of our stream because it is always important to test your water parameters. And every single week, I recommend to you that you test all your water parameters in all your tanks to know what they are. You can stick the numbers in Reef Trace and you can track them. And seriously, knowing your water parameters is such an important step. And in my own tank, every single week something happens. Some little issue arises. I noticed that my Trident was reporting that my alkalinity had dropped. So I went to look, and the tubing of my Versa pump has yet again gone flat. I put a new piece of tube in there, and now it's pumping water through the reactor perfectly, but my alkalinity is probably about 1 DKH lower. So I have an entire bag of Reborn. I'm going to cut it open today and pour half a bag into the reactor to fill it up with more media, so I get my alkalinity back where it needs to be before I lose some corals. And, you know, not knowing these things I would end up with less coral. So that's why water testing is so important. So whether you have something automated or you have test kits you use, it's just really important to use that stuff and stay on top of it, make sure it's running properly, so that way you will know what your numbers are. And if you are just saying everything looks fine, it's good enough, you know, if you're just telling yourself it's okay to be lazy, please stop. Stop being lazy. It's really important that we take good care of our animals, and so that they can be beautiful and gorgeous, and we want to share our tanks. So do your maintenance, do your water testing, get everything done, and then you will save lives. That's what Caitlin said. Water tests save lives, and she's 100% right. So highly recommend that you do that today. It's Water Test Saturday. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Again, watch out for the heat. Make sure you're ready for your aquarium. Do what you can. At the very least, get yourself a nice big fan. Matter of fact, I've got a fan here I can throw on the screen. It's going to cover my face if I can find it. Where did it go? It just vanished. It's gone. I don't know where it went. I had it somewhere and it vanished. I have a big fan I got at Home Depot. I think it was like $80. Instead of a box fan, it's a round one. It's orange, it's made by Rigid, and it sits on the top of the overflow box, the end of my tank, and just blows on the water for in an emergency. And I used it when I had an AC problem a couple months ago. Haven't had to use it since. I thought maybe I'd use it in the workshop or in the the garage or in the backyard or whatever. But I haven't. But if something goes wrong, I've got it ready. If you don't have something ready, Go get it now before you're in the middle of the crisis. So you can say, okay, I got my fan. I'm ready to go. And I can start doing this. And you can float ice in your tank to cool it down, whether it's frozen bottles or you buy bags of ice from 7-Eleven or some other convenience store, and you just set those things in the sump or you put them in the tank and you watch your thermometer closely to make sure you don't go too far the other direction. But just do something, be proactive, be prepared, be a Boy Scout. And your tank should thank you later for all your hard work. Guys, have a great weekend, and I will see you again in a week. Bye.